Hi there, I'm Jeanette Lane, and in today's video I'm going to show you 5 ways to use embossing folders. So here I have some, these are the ones I'm going to be using for this tutorial. So these two are from Apple Blossom, and then this one is from Card Making Magic. Now embossing folders come in various sizes with different designs, and they're a great way to add texture to your cards, and also great for bulk making cards because you basically just need to add maybe a focal sentiment or a focal stamp image on this, or maybe a bigger die like a little wine glass would pair well with this one. And then you would be all done. So that's what I love about embossing folders, but sometimes, you do need some extra ideas, different ways that you can use them. So the first one I'm gonna be showing you is the easiest, which I think is honestly the easiest, is how to do partial embossing. And I'm going to use this one, which is Wine Varieties from the Apple Blossom Drinks Trolley collection. So when you usually do your embossing, you open up your folder and you pop your cardstock inside, close it completely, and run it through your die cutting machine to get that nice texture. But you can always do partial embossing. So if you have a bigger die cutting machine, like an A4 sized, you can do it this way. For the sake of this video, I'll show you because I'm using the smaller die cutting machine with the 6-inch platform. So what you could do is just do a partial embossing, and you can run it through your machine this way. It might actually fit. Nope. So if you have an A4 sized die cutting machine, you can run it through this way and do a partial embossing and just get that gorgeous texture on just one side of your cardstock. But since I don't have a large die cutting machine, I'm just going to put half, oh, you can see my face there, hi. So we're just gonna put half of that in there to do some partial embossing. So we're gonna do that maybe there, that looks good, and I'm gonna run it through my die cutting machine. Now when you're embossing, you wanna make sure to read your die cutting machine manual to double check which combination of platforms that you need to emboss on your die cutting machine, just to make sure your die cutting machine is not ruined or damaged or anything like that. And here you can see that gorgeous partial embossing that we did there. So now I want to do the other side just a bit, kind of the same way. So I'm going to rotate that, line that up, and I'm going to emboss the top half of this. So then that way we get a nice little, just a blank space here, which you can use for a stamp or a sentiment die, or maybe you have a little wine glass sticker or a wine glass die cut that you can use. So there is my partial embossing, and now I can trim this. So I'm going to trim off the excess to make like an A6 size kind of card. Now it's time to decorate my card front. So I have that strip here along the center without any embossing. So I'm going to add this flower die cut. So we have a blue that contrasts really nicely with the red. And then I have a thank you sentiment. So it says with thanks. And we're just going to pop that right underneath. That looks good, and we just need to add that to a card base and we are done. But I love how this is just a different way to use your embossing folder. Next, I want to show you a different technique, and I'm going to use the same embossing folder for this one. So I have a piece of gray cardstock here. You can use any color, and we're just going to pop that into our embossing folder and run it through our die cutting machine with the right platform. And I'm using a Big Shot fold away. Really love this thing. Lots of nice pressure, good for embossing and die cutting. All right, so we ran that through, and I think this is a 5x7 embossing folder, in case you're wondering. Yep, 5x7 inches, so great for larger makes. All right, so when we open this up, of course we get that gorgeous texture. Here we can see that beautiful texture. That's so nice, it's so elegant. So what I'm gonna do now is add some gilding polish. So this is from Cosmic Shimmer, and it's Copper Shine Gilding Polish. So we're gonna open that up, and it has a little applicator sponge, which you can use as well to like dip it in the gilding polish and kind of go over your raised edges. But I really love I love how creamy this is, so I don't mind using my finger. So there it goes. It's just gonna add a nice copper color to our raised, to the raised areas in our embossing. And we're just gonna go over it. And if you get some on the background, I don't mind. I used to be very picky and get upset about it. It's just gonna bring out that gorgeous texture and do a nice little highlight while still showing the gray background just a bit. And I love how the gilding polish instantly transforms your embossing. Doesn't that look really nice? So now it's time to go on to our third technique. Now for this next technique, I'm going to use this Thinking of You embossing folder from Card Making Magic just to switch things up. And I'm going to use some textured cardstock. So for this technique, you either need some cardstock with a white backing. So let me show you there. The color is on the front and you can see the white on the back. Or you can use white core cardstock. Now white core cardstock is made of, so you'll see the color on the front, but instead of the white on the back, you'll see another layer of color. So it'll be red on both sides, but in between will be a layer of white. So that's white core cardstock. And I didn't have any on hand, but you can still use any cardstock that has this white backing. So that will work. It will work with that. You can't use cardstock that is a solid color. Sometimes you can see the edge, so if you turn the edge of your cardstock and you see any white in between, then it is a white core cardstock, but this one is not, so this technique won't work with that. You're gonna definitely need white core cardstock, or there's also craft core cardstock, so it has a color, craft color cardstock in between. The two layers on the outside. So this one is going to work. I'm sure you can find some in your stash just like that. And we're going to emboss this normally. And the reason that you need that white core cardstock or the white backed cardstock is we're going to remove one of the layers with a sanding block or a piece of sandpaper. And it's going to give us a really nice effect. Sometimes you'll even get that effect right away. So you can see there as I open that up, you can see the white layer on the back of the card. It's popping through because of the pressure. So it's kind of embossed and it started to distress the top of our design. I'm going to be using my Kaiser Craft sand block, or you can use a piece of sandpaper, and all we're going to do is distress the top. So we're going to remove with even strokes, we're going to remove that top layer of color and reveal the white backing, the white backed card. So that. So we're just going to start sanding this down to stress our design. And you want to be very gentle. Don't go too crazy. Now don't apply too much pressure because sometimes that may tear your paper. So just be very careful. You can do a long downward stroke like that, or you can do an upward stroke as well, or you can just do like little back and forth motions. That should do it. And then you just want to remove all the fibers. You can use a brush or you can just use your hand and kind of clean off all the fibers that you have sanded off. So there we go. Now you can just trim this down, add a sentiment, or just leave that as is. I think it's a really stunning card front. You can add some gemstones here and there, add that to a card base, and you're good to go. The next technique I wanted to show you was how to use your embossing folders with your inks. So I'm going to use Distress Oxides, but you can do this technique with any of your ink pads. Just make sure if you're using a permanent ink that you clean your embossing folder right away or it might stain it. Now this technique is really fun because it almost turns your embossing folder into a stamp, which is a great look. So I have a piece of cardstock here. I'm going to be using the same Thinking of You embossing folder, and I have my Distress Oxide. Now I'm feeling my embossing folder because I want to add my ink to the flat side, so not the raised side with the raised texture. I always have had the best results by putting the ink on the flat side here. So that's what I'm gonna do, just because it's never failed me. When I've tried it on this side, it just doesn't do, the whole embossing folder sometimes gets inked. I don't know, it's just never worked out for me. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just going to tap my ink pad all across. I guess you can kind of do rubby motions, rubbing it into your embossing folder, but sometimes the ink will, if you have a really juicy pad, it'll seep through into the lower design, you know, the depressed edges of the design, and it won't give you the nice effect that we need, because we want to be able to see that texture. And if you're using distress oxides or a water reactive ink, you can spritz your either your cardstock or your embossing folder beforehand, before you put your paper inside and run it through, to give you like a really nice watery, like oxidized kind of look. But it's a little bit messy. So if you don't want messy, then this is your best bet. All right, so our embossing folder is nice and saturated. Okay, so our embossing folder is nice and inky. I'm going to pop my cardstock inside, and once you close your folder, you cannot go back. So this is a commitment. This is the moment of truth. There's no going back. Once you close that, you don't want to shift it around, because it will, you're not gonna get the best impression, the best embossing. Now the pressure of the machine is going to not only emboss, but transfer all of that gorgeous color. I forgot what color I was using. I do apologize. That was Distress Oxide in Peacock Feathers. So I'm just gonna roll it back towards me. And when we open it, we're gonna get a very colorful surprise. That's beautiful. So that is the look that we get when you pair your embossing folders with your inks. And in my case, this is Distress Oxide and Peacock Feathers, which I think looks fabulous. That's beautiful. Now the last technique I wanted to show you was how to use paint with your embossing folders. And I'm bringing back the Drinks Trolley collection embossing folder that I was using earlier. So for this technique, you're going to need a brayer. So this one is from Spectrum Noir, and some paint. So the one I'm using is glitter paint from Aladdin, Zinc Diamond glitter paint. This is a really nice color. So we've got some paint now on our glass mat. Once you have your paint medium down, you want to take your brayer, kind of flatten that out a little bit. So we're gonna pick up our paint with our brayer, kind of spread it out here onto my glass mat, and we're going to, let me move my die cutting machine out of the way, and we're going to spread this onto just one side of our embossing folder. I'm just gonna go over it in a nice even motion. Now for this to work perfectly, the trick is to add an even layer of paint with your brayer as best as you can, so that the color doesn't, the paint doesn't seep through on the lowered texture there, on our textured design. But here, I know that did not go very well, because I think I had too much paint on just this section, maybe just this section of the brayer, and so it seeped into the design. But it should be okay. I think for the most part, it did it pretty well. So just make sure, practice as many times as you need to, make sure that it all goes okay. So just make sure you take your time with your paint, making sure that it's not too runny, that it has kind of a nice body and it holds, so that it doesn't seep into your design. So now we're going to transfer that gorgeous paint onto our cardstock, and I'm just using a piece of gray. So I'm gonna close that up, and once you close it, you gotta commit. Seal the deal. So we're gonna run that through my die cutting machine. This technique is very similar to the inking technique that I showed you earlier with my Distress Oxides. And if you want, you can also use a brayer with this technique with your oxides, with your ink pads. So what you would do is have a clean brayer and just go right over your ink pad and then transfer it onto your embossing folder like we did with the paint. So let's just run this through though, so that I can show you. And I've used a gray piece of cardstock, so that it has a nice contrast with the teal paint, which is gorgeous. Man, I've done a lot of teal today. So there you can see the paint has transferred on to certain sections of our embossing folder. So there's the result up close, and you can see that the paint seeped into some of these designs, except up here where you can still see the gray there on the Shiraz. So that is the effect that you want, but I just got too much paint on my brayer, I think, or I didn't smooth it out. But anyway, this technique will work. Again, just use a thin layer of paint. Make sure it's not too runny so that it doesn't seep into your design, but still a great way to get a different look with your embossing folders. I hope that you enjoyed these 5 ways to use your embossing folders and that you try out these techniques. Let us know how they work for you.